Chief Executive of the Herefordshire and Worcestershire Chamber of Commerce, and it's my privilege to host the question and answer session which is going to follow. We were submitted a number of questions, there's 8 in total, that we're going to go through in advance, and then after that we will go through some of the questions that have been submitted earlier this evening by people as they're coming through the door. So if you're ready?
Yeah.
First one, could I ask Robert Lee from Hereford Windows?
Good evening. Since I first opened my question, 2 long-established local glazing companies have ceased trading within the last 2 months alone, with many over the last year, and we've had to make cutbacks in order to survive. I think it would be beneficial to the environment and to the economy if VAT was reduced to 5% on items that reduce energy and carbon emissions, such as insulation and double glazing. As well as increasing sales and encouraging people to use energy, it would support the more established and reliable businesses. Plus the Secretary agreed with this and is able to do something about it. And I have already mentioned, hopefully, that you are.
Yes, I mean, it's the kind of thing we would love to do more of. As I understand it, there are some insulation products that are already covered by lower VAT rates, aren't they? Under the lower rate of duty for fuel-related things. I mean, the problem with this is that there are all kind of different ways in which you could use the VAT system to provide support for different kinds of industries. I mean, my particular favourite would be giving VAT relief for home improvements, because you then get a big injection of activity into the building industry. I've just come from a meeting in Brecon and Radnor where everybody was pressing for concessional rate of VAT for the tourist industry. But the problem is we're limited in what we can do because of the budget position. All kind of very good ideas, which I'm sure this is one, are having to be put on one side until we can stabilise the budget. But I hear what you say. It's an attractive idea. It's an extension of what we're already doing. But I think we've got to be careful. The underlying problem we've all got in government is the difficulty of saying no to attractive propositions until we can get the budget sorted out.
The next one is Peter Martin from junk.com.
Thank you. I've been asked to introduce what it is. Are we still in that?
Yes, quickly.
Okay, junk.com is a free website that matchmakes globally sourced and collated ideas and products for reuse of consumer waste, with those seeking to avoid filling the bin or the landfill. My question for Dr. Cable is, there seems to be a need to create teams linking ideas, money, sales, to develop genuine green businesses and jobs. But most government support is for big business and projects. Small local innovators need help linking up with experts in finance and sales. Instead of short-term grants that rely on ticking boxes to determine outcomes, can the government see a way to empower existing local networks, like Green Links and the Chamber of Commerce, to provide a focused link-up process?
Well, I think you're right in your general proposition that governments tend necessarily to be involved in big things. I mean, for good reasons. I mean, I shouldn't be sitting in Whitehall making decisions that affect your local community. But I think at the big end of the scale, the kind of work that you're doing, which was brilliant. I mean, you gave me a bit of a tour of your stand beforehand. I mean, the concept of reducing waste is very much embedded in the policy. In fact, the first projects that will be approved under the Green Investment Bank are likely to be big waste reduction projects because they won't happen through the market. They're going to need some kind of government pump priming, so that will happen at that big level. But at your level, I think, 2 thoughts really. I think first of all we need to get networks like Green Links into the local enterprise partnership, which up in this area is Hereford and Worcester. That's what I think one of the more dynamic ones. And working through them. And what can we do to help? Well, one of the things that the government has been trying to get off the ground in the last year or so is a mentoring system, trying to identify people around the country who have a good background in business or banking in some cases, and who can come in and help fledgling companies get off the ground and grow, and have really good hands-on practical experience. But as you say, in the current environment, we're not in a position to splash around lots of grants, even if we wanted to.
Thank you, Peter. Phil Brown, consultant.
My business is about putting management systems in for companies to the ISO 14001, which is the international standard for the environment. And I basically work with companies that are get one UCAS accreditation, which is the UK accreditation service. And what I come up against is companies that have been accredited to the standard by non-UCAS accredited bodies, and then find that they need my help. So my question is, what is the government doing about making sure that companies are aware of the need to get accredited by a UCAS accredited body, so that they don't have to pay twice to get accredited? At the moment, if they have to fill in a PQQ and they're not accredited by a UCAS company, then they don't stand any chance of getting a tender one. So I'm interested in knowing what the government is doing to try and make companies aware of that situation.
Well, that's a very specific question. I'm not sure I'm going to give you a totally satisfactory answer. I mean, the broad approach is that ISO standards have achieved their status because, I mean, they're essentially a voluntary standard setting system, and companies aspire to, have an ISO 9000, whatever it happens to be, because they know that it's a template of success. It's done that way rather than through government compulsion. And we are trying to get away from the idea of the government passing lots of regulations which then have to be enforced through some enforcement agency and all the bureaucracy associated with that. Whenever I go to a small business conference, whether it's the FSB or the Chamber of Commerce, they criticise and say, why haven't you got rid of more regulation? Nobody is clamouring to have more of it. So the idea of using government compulsion and regulation is not an attractive one. I think, in a way, you answered your own question by saying, in a sense, what we need is to get more awareness, promotion of, and we've got to obviously try and do that through the trade association. But if you're able to give me and my team a bit more information on what's lacking, I'll try and see how we can raise awareness.
Thank you, Phil. Next one, Jens from the Green Earth Energy.
Good evening. I'm here on behalf of Green Earth Energy. We're a local renewable energy installing company. Lately it seems that the government sort of has a lot of toing and froing in terms of the policy side as far as feed-in tariffs go, and particularly also with the renewable heat incentive, which has caused a lot of problems in the industry, which we're working for, as well as also for customers, which are very insecure about where we're actually heading or what the policies are. And this obviously affects especially small companies like we are locally. To run a business, we need clear, reliable vision of government policies over the next 3 years, so we can develop effective business plans. And we can't keep employing people to then laying them off, as we just had to do last week, and make them redundant. So, what are the government policies on this now in regards to feed-in tariffs and renewable heat incentives? And will there be some consistency and reliability in those policies in the future?
Well, I know there is a lot of unhappiness about the solar feed-in tariff, and some companies, as you say, have been so disadvantaged they've gone bust in the process. I think it's important to understand how we got to where we are. The last government introduced a scheme for the feed-in tariff. At the time, I don't think that was not a criticism of them, it was a technical judgment, and nobody quite understood the speed at which technology would advance, driving down costs. So the subsidy element was actually running out of control, and we cannot have unlimited subsidies, so a limitation had to be put on it. As you know, there was a legal challenge when the government put limits, and so the process was extended. But nonetheless, some companies have been caught with it, and it's for them being a mess. I mean, just to be clear about the wider perspective, all major Western governments that are encouraging solar power have been in exactly the same position. The Germans have had exactly the same problem, and they've had a lot of very unhappy companies affected as yours have been, because they've had to limit their subsidies as well. The Spanish are in the same position. We've all had to do it. But it is now being put on, I think, onto a more manageable basis. We will get a lot more solar panels introduced. And I do recognise, and to the extent to which I'm part of the government, I do apologise for any disruption you've faced, but it's something we had to deal with, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Jens. Next one is from Paula Urry from Southern Solar Limited.
Yeah, Southern Solar is another solar specialist in the area, and we've been trading since 2002. Part of my question has just been covered by Green Earth Energy, but I would like to pin you down a bit more about the renewable heat incentive that's been on the cards for a while now, and is the government still going ahead with that, and will be unaffected by the problems we've had with the feed-in tariff? And another question, there's an increasing burden of regulation and insurance on installers accredited with the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, the MCS. In the meantime, unregulated companies continue to install solar voltaic systems using the feed-in tariff incentive to sell. Customers find out too late that their installation is not eligible for the feed-in tariff. When is the government going to make it illegal to do this and really protect the customer?
Well, let me just deal with the major new element, which is the first part of your question, the renewable heat initiative. I think we're the only country in the world that's doing this, actually. But the minister in DEC that's leading it, which is Greg Dark, has made it very clear we are proceeding. The current stage, as I understand it, as it's not my department, but I'm trying to follow what's going on, is that it is being just introduced for business use at the present time. The domestic initiative will come into effect next year. We have to go through a variety of legal hoops, consultation, which is going to take place, I think, July to September. Subject to that evolving in a satisfactory way, the renewable heat scheme will be proceeding. There is a subsidy element involved in it, and therefore we've got to be careful we don't go over the same mistakes we have with solar power. But it is going ahead in that kind of timescale.
Thank you, Paul. Next one, could I have George Mackison from Impetus?
With many small businesses and social enterprises still having difficulty getting the loans they need from the big banks, does it not make sense to give more support to local community development finance institutions that are set up to fill this gap? At a local level, there's a better chance of really knowing the reliability of the enterprises applying for loans. What are the government's plans for empowering local finance support for local businesses?
Well, we had a good discussion of this outside when I met you in the entrance area. I mean, the community development finance is an extremely valuable initiative because for the reasons you say, it sort of bypasses the banking system and it gets a bit like Heineken to the parts of the body that the banks can't reach. The practical way that we're trying to support it is through something called the Regional Growth Fund, which was initially established, I think 2.4 billion, we've added another billion onto that, and that's to try and reach parts of the British economy that have been particularly badly affected by economic change, and particularly where there are cuts in the private sector. It's mainly the northeast of England and the northwest West Midlands, but I think there have been some projects in this area which have benefited from it too. And some of that money is being channeled to community development finance. So essentially pump prime the money that's coming from other sources. I think in our conversation you identified the fact that there are difficulties because the European Union, which was a source of funding, has started introducing restrictions which make it more difficult to get at. But I think in our conversation we identified the fact that we're potentially getting past that. And certainly in government we do our best to expedite it.
Thank you, George. Could I have Sharon Pocock from Kinder Pocock?
Hello. I run a local accountancy practice for local businesses. Small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy, yet current rates of tax only serve to suffocate them before they have had a chance to get established. The tax system and a lot of the guidance is perceived as What is being done to create tax incentives for new and small green businesses, and how will this be communicated to them?
Well, I think there are two questions rolled into one there. You're right that one of the big problems facing small companies is tax complexity. We often talk about getting rid of red tape, but actually the biggest red tape is often around the way in which HMRC's rules operate. Somebody pointed out that there are, in Tolley's guide, which all tax accountants use, there are now more pages than in any other country except India. I think we've overtaken India actually in the last few years. There's always a temptation in government to introduce lots of tweaks, clever little things. I mean, actually we started with the question about value-added tax and can we exempt a new category of goods. And of course all those things add to the complexity of the system. One of the things that George Osborne said in the budget was that there is now a major push going to take place. The HMRC are going to come out with some detailed proposal actually in the next few weeks about how we greatly reduce particularly the way the value-added tax system operates for small companies, but also income tax and corporate tax to the extent to which they pay it. And Jesse, I'm sure, will keep you in touch with the latest moves. In terms of tax incentives, green companies do, as I understand it, have a form of enhanced capital allowances, and so in a sense that's already been recognised.
Thank you, Sharon. Sue Parkinson.
Good evening. My question is about the National Planning Policy Framework, which I actually taken my question when it was put in its draft form. I have to say that having read yesterday evening the one that's been adopted, I'm a bit more comfortable with it than I was about the draft version. But even so, I do still have concerns about the three legs on which sustainable development is built, and around which the planning policy framework is meant to deliver. I do still feel that business and economic development is more of an overriding concern than the other two legs of sustainable development, which are part of the well-being of people and the environment. And I wondered whether you could say something about how you feel that the National Planning Policy Framework will help to deliver more sustainable capital development, which we've all three of those.
Well, the National Planning Framework the other day was, I mean, it would be uniquely for a government document, was hailed by almost everybody. Slightly worryingly in a way, people were praising it from opposite directions, which maybe something's going to be disappointing eventually. The Minister, Greg Clark, who actually spends half his time in my department, is a very good minister, and he really, really listened to all the criticisms and tried to accommodate them. What the National Planning Framework does is, first of all, massively simplify some very complex rules. Any of you who've ever done a planning application will know how horrendously complicated it is. We've slimmed down, or he's slimmed down, the 1,000 pages of planning guidance to about 50, making it much less obscure. But at the end of the day, I mean, the whole point about planning is that it is a balance, right? You're trying to balance things. On the one hand, people's wish to use their freedom, which they're quite likely to have in a free society, to expand their property, do what they like with their homes and guns, and that has got to be traded off and balanced against the overall environment that we all enjoy. And there is no perfect solution to that. I was intrigued and actually slightly flattered to discover that the definition of sustainable development that they use in that guidance was one that I and a colleague dreamt up 25 years ago when we wrote the Brundtland report, and it's now become the kind of standard mantra for sustainable development. And it is essentially about how you balance growth against conservation. And I mean, the truth is, if I can be honest with you, I mean, as a politician, it is so easy actually to play both sides against the middle. I mean, in my own constituency, I'm perpetually bombarded with requests from local residents to block every single development that takes place because people feel it's eroding their local neighbourhood, they feel it's going to affect their property prices, and as an MP it's very tempting actually to get into bed with every pressure group that comes along, and I'm probably bit naughtier than I should have been in the past, but I'm now trying to be a bit more disciplined about it. There is a let me just give you one example from my own area. I don't know the issues you face in Hereford. Twickenham Station, right, is going to become, 3 years' time, a central point for 80,000 people coming through for the Rugby World Cup. Those of you who go to big matches at Twickenham will know it's hopelessly dysfunctional. So the station's been redeveloped. The people who came up with the proposal came up with the idea of doing it with a 10-storey block of flats on top of the station. And of course the local residents absolutely hate this because it's building a high-rise building right in the middle of a relatively low-rise community, and this is taking us what they call the Croydonisation of our suburb. So they got me involved, and I actually supported them. I think they had perfectly legitimate environmental objectives, but at the same time, in government, I'm arguing that we've got to press ahead with development and house building because people are short of homes. So, as Jesse will know, particularly as his political career progresses, you're constantly faced with this trade-off. Do you want more homes now, or do you want them to be done in an environmentally attractive way? There's no right answer, and I think that the planning framework, which is now being crafted, is the nearest you're likely to get to a good balance.
Thank you very much. Our next question is from people who submitted the question today, so they may not be sitting in a convenient place. Jonathan Hines from Archetype Limited.
Well, I'm from Archetype, it's a sustainable architectural practice. I'm going to start with a little analogy. Whilst it's good to recycle rubbish, it's much better not to create it in the first place. So too with energy. Whilst it's good to have renewable energy, it's much better to use less in the first place. Now, we know the feed-in tariffs have been very successful at encouraging people to invest in renewables, but there is no government incentive to enable more energy-efficient building construction. Given that building-based renewable technologies that are encouraged by feed-in tariffs are somewhat uneconomic ways to generate energy, I wonder whether you would support the government in considering instead focusing any money in subsidy and certainly regulation on improving building energy efficiency to reduce energy consumption. I prefer it if you didn't use the Green Deal as an example in your answer, because there's many of us in the building industry that are concerned that it's actually more focused on getting good financial return to investors rather than being an effective way to reduce energy consumption. So I'm really looking for your sort of ideas about how we could actually use potential money, but more importantly, encouragement and incentive and regulation to improve building energy efficiency.
Yes, I think the premise underlying your question is right. Conservation is much better than wasting and then trying to use the waste. And certainly in the case of energy, all the economic work that's ever been done suggests that by far the most cost-effective way of dealing with the energy problem is to invest in conservation rather than building nuclear power stations or windmills or whatever. So yeah, we should focus on conservation. The biggest source of heat loss are domestic homes, and that's partly because Britain is an old country, and a lot of our buildings are very old, and they were built by the Victorians, or they were built in the interwar period when there was a big spurt of house building when these things were not a matter of concern. So trying to get home insulation going in an effective way is a big challenge. I mean, one way of short-circuiting it, of course, is to make sure that new building is absolutely secure. Building standards have been tightened considerably in recent years, as I understand it. We now have agreed, I think in the last few months, we've now got a definition of a zero-carbon home. It may sound precise, but it isn't. And I think this is now accepted. It's going to work its way through into future building standards. There is a lot of controversy about how far you go with all this. Some people complain that building industry complain that the standards are excessively onerous and they're adding X £1,000 onto every new home. And again, we've got to strike a balance there. But I accept your basic proposition. Conservation is where we should start. The best way of doing that is to have proper building standards. And I think my understanding is that this is already beginning to work its way through.
And Jonathan, David Harrington from Quality Registration Services Limited.
My question is a way of actually raising extra revenue for you instead of
That's a popular suggestion.
Yes. Late payment is the scourge of small business. Government could end it and raise extra revenue at the same time with a simple change to the VAT rules. But to say that you don't pay an invoice to terms, you can't reclaim the VAT. Not then, not ever. Effectively imposing a tax of 20% on late payment would put an end to it. Those of you who didn't pay to terms would be contributing extra to the exchequer. Why doesn't the government do it? What's not to like?
Well, I think then it sounds sensible, sounds eminently sensible. I suspect there may be all kind of unintended consequences that I haven't thought through in the 10 seconds since you asked the question. But I'll ask certainly my officials to look at it carefully, and if you can give us your details, we'll try and give you a considered answer to it. But I think it does open up slightly the whole issue about late payment. I think one of the difficulties we had getting through this crisis was that some of the big and relatively cash-rich companies, the big supermarkets, for example, pay 90 days, sometimes longer, and are crippling people down the supply chain. And the underlying problem that you describe is still very much with us, because what's happening in the British economy at the moment is we have very big companies that are extremely cash-rich, are sitting on billions and billions, tens, hundreds of billions of cash, where at the same time small enterprises, including companies in their own supply chains, are starved of capital and they cannot get money from the banks or from anywhere else. One of the things I'm trying to do, following a report that was done for me by the former chairman of Legal General, is to get proper supply chain finance going so that the cash-rich companies at the top provide credit to people lower down the supply chain. This is quite common in the United States, but it doesn't happen here. We're setting up a fund, a 100 million fund, to try and make sure this works properly and on a much bigger scale. But as far as late payments concerned, one of the things the last government did, which I think was right and sensible, was that they did try to make sure that governments, central and local governments, settled their bills within 30 days, so that at least people supplying the public sector were paid on time. I'm afraid some of the big private sector operators haven't been so considerate.
And I must say the public sector contributed very, very well to that. Our experiences locally were that the 2 county councils and the 6 district councils over in Worcester really did their best to achieve it. I think some of them were down to 10 days, I think that was the target, wasn't it? And the big businesses benefited a lot from that. Thank you. And the last question from this session, could I ask John Jarvis, leader of the Hereford County Council, for his question?
Could you tell me what your department could do to help Herefordshire Council help the businesses in this room more than we are at the moment?
Well, the mechanism we're using, and you know because I think you're very actively involved in it, is the local enterprise partnership idea. Rather than working directly to local government, and rather than operating through the old regional development agencies, which were pretty inefficient and very bureaucratic and public sector dominated, we're trying to operate through these partnership arrangements, which are private sector led. The arrangement in Marches is that you have Herefordshire and Worcester together. We talked about this over dinner, so I'm getting a little bit of the feedback from some of your issues. I think that what you're telling me is that we in government have got to be a little bit more involved rather than just throwing the problem back at you and saying get on with it. I know you'd like a bit of money, that's always difficult, but we're reflecting on it. And perhaps giving a bit more of a steer as to what we want these local enterprise partnerships to do. I mean, one of the things that is getting off the ground in your LEP is the enterprise zones, which are going to be used to attract in particularly companies from overseas, manufacturing companies. And I know you're making good progress with that, and with the way we're helping them is through business rate relief, possibly capital allowances if that can be negotiated. But the way in which BIS is operating is primarily in that way. I think the only other thing I would mention, and I'll leave it at that, is that what we're trying to create around the country is a small network which we call BIS Local, where we have local representatives who can work with the LEPs or county councils or cities in some instances to provide support in areas where national services are involved, like UK Trade and Industry, which does trade promotion work, or with these new innovation centres that we're setting up, because we do recognise that when we swept away the regional development agencies, as in the West Midlands, we did sweep away a lot of waste, but we also swept away some good people doing good things. And we have, as a consequence, lost some of the local intelligence, you know, the people who used to work on the ground, dealing with local councils and local business, and acting as a bridge with central government. I'm conscious of the dangers of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so I want to create not a large, but a manageable network, which we'll call BIS Local, which can hopefully liaise better with you where national services are concerned.
Thank you. In terms of what we have got in Herefordshire, there's a very strong business-led business board. Neil Kerr, our chairman, is here. We've got a Hereford Futures that's looking to do great things within Hereford City Centre and beyond. And he mentioned the Enterprise Zone, and our leader of that is a guy called Ray Stone, formerly Chief Executive of Wigan Special Metals, and now fully retired, but working probably more hours than he worked when he was with Special Metals, leading the Enterprise Zone. So our private sector are fully committed, and we are using their knowledge and their drive to make sure that we can get the benefits that we can in our county to support the businesses. But it's not up to me to have the last word. Would you like to say something before you go?
Well, I'd just like to thank you for organising this event, actually. I mean, what I've picked up in the short time I've been here is that, you know, there's a real civic engagement here, which is missing in many parts of the country.
I think there's a lot of real...
This theatre is a wonderful example. I mean, I had a tour before we started of a community facility that is now operating on a business like this. It's in many parts of the country. You know, good arts centres are struggling, and people say, well, why isn't the government giving us money? But you've got a model here that works, and works extremely well, and it reflects very well on the town. And I think, you know, the fact that you've got such a large audience here dealing with, you know, what's quite a specialised area, you know, the link between environment and business, and asking very probing questions is, you know, I found this a really invigorating event, so thank you.
Can I, on your behalf, thank Dr. Cable, Secretary of State for Business, Innovation and Skills, and wish him well in the journey wherever he's going next.
Thank you.
Thank you.